I'll introduce myself first. My name is Gan Akers. I'm the Director of Clinical Education and Outreach at Hillside. We work with kids who need more than regular outpatient. Kids once a week therapy is not enough. We have 4 different programs that can come in and help support them, from intensive in-home, that's 4 hours a week of therapists in your home working in conjunction with outpatient providers, to our virtual intensive outpatient program of learning DBT skills, really healthy ways to cope in a short amount of time, to our day treatment program here in Atlanta, as well as our residential treatment program that specializes in DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. I'm so excited to introduce you to Amy Rene, who is our Vice President of Community Operations and Clinical Services. She has a passion for working with parents. And so I'll go ahead and let you get started so that we can get to all of our information.
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for coming today. I'm glad you're all here. I am very passionate about working with parents, and I'm really passionate about everything I've learned about family accommodation in the last couple of years. Some of it from my own personal journey. And so I will try to share what I have learned so that you also can apply it to what's happening with you and your child. Many of you, if you are receiving Hillside services, are probably not just dealing with school avoidance, you're probably dealing with co-occurring issues. But today I'm going to talk to you specifically about school avoidance related to anxiety. And what that looks like and how family accommodation actually plays a part in it. And then what we can do instead of doing family accommodation, we want to decrease that and increase more effective behaviors that actually don't teach the anxiety that it's winning. So anxiety wins a lot of times, and that's how school avoidance gets caught in a loop. So a little bit about the agenda. Gone, you're getting feedback. Okay. So I'm gonna let Gon handle that. And Gon, you've got control
I
of
muted mine, so I'm not sure. I'm muting my thing.
Okay, so it's good for some, but not for others. So maybe on your end, maybe you can log out and log back in, the parent that was having some issues. Yeah. And Gon, you've got control of the slides, right? So can you advance?
I do. All right.
Okay. So the first slide is about our agenda, kind of going over what this is. And there's a quote there about rates of mental health problems. Everybody knows that mental health problems are increasing, and that we've also got absenteeism in the community that's increasing, especially since 2020, since the pandemic. And this Dr. Kearney has done a lot of research and development of tools to use with school avoidance. So I wanted you to have his name. And we also think that they're correlated. So we're seeing way more school avoidance given the increases of absenteeism and mental health issues. So what school refusal or school avoidance is on the next slide is anxiety-related avoidance of school. So this is when your kiddo is refusing to go, having complete absence, or having difficulty in checking out, like leaving the school day early or going to school late. Attending school following intense behavior problems, or displaying unusual distress at school. It is a neurobehavioral condition, neurologically based, but behaviorally conditioned and reinforced. So we're going to talk about reinforcement and what that looks like. The peak ages we notice in the field are transitional ages. So 5 to 6 when kids start school, 10 to 13 when kids go to middle school, and 14 to 15 when kids are in high school. And so that's when we see the peaks. This is another definition from 1997, so pre-pandemic. And this definition, Dr. Berg said that there was less than 80% attendance recorded over 2 weeks, presence of an anxiety disorder, excluding OCD and PTSD, parents knowing where their kid is, and not just like running away, and no concurrent DSM conduct disorder. Parents must be committed to helping the child achieve total school attendance. So this is how he diagnosed or said that this was school avoidance. Some of the characteristics that you may see of what's happening when school settings have school avoidance are limited friendships at school, changes in the friend group, outgrowing a friend group, pressures to perform and excel. So, in middle school, there's a lot of societal pressure with the friend groups. And then you also can see this when there's academic intensity. And so when they have more of a workload, sometimes that creates some anxiety, or perhaps they've experienced some trauma in school, bullying, some other kind of traumatic incident, school shootings, etc. Just the whole phenomena of school shootings has definitely made kiddos who have anxiety a little more on edge when they are at school. Then there's the fear of COVID, a fear of unstructured time, perceptions of inclusion. So anyone from a marginalized area or category may experience some school avoidance associated. So what we see is the school avoidance loop. And so there may be something that happens that's a school-based situation. One of the characteristics that I just went over may be present. And then what we may see is an increase in the child's anxiety and distress. And then that can lead to the child avoiding situations and scenarios. And then that avoidance wins, and the decrease in anxiety happens. And so there's a negative reinforcement that occurs. So it's a classic flight or flight response. So this is important to note that this loop continually happens, which makes the anxiety increase overall. And it makes the avoidance kind of win in the situation where it becomes avoidance is generally considered a maladaptive behavioral response to excessive fear or anxiety, which in turn sustains the anxiety disorder. And I keep saying the anxiety wins because I'm a parent that has gone through some of this. And so it does feel like someone's winning and that anxiety is winning. So then just kind of help you to understand behaviorism. So reinforcers. So we talk about this in DBT a lot as well. So this may not be new information to you. So the behaviors are reinforced. Are consequences that result in an increase in behavior. For example, school avoidance. They provide information to a person about what you want them to do. So going to school because there's a cute boy there, that's a reinforcing incident that's occurring. Positive reinforcement, to get a little more specific, is something like staying home, which leads to a parent spending time with the child, or maybe video games or social media play. So this is increasing the frequency of a behavior by providing a rewarding consequence. Then there's negative reinforcement. So that's the third. So we have more school avoidance, refusal due to a pop quiz or bullying. So it's an increase in the frequency of a behavior by removing something negative. It's release from something unpleasant. So this is just important to kind of keep in mind about how behavior works and how behaviors actually are attached to school avoidance. And so we wanted to give you a reminder of these. So breaking the loop means anxiety is distressing and unpleasant, but it's not dangerous. So one of the things that's very important to get across to your child, as the caretaker, is that anxiety is something we can live with. And so it's really in all the different types of treatment, that's something that is consistent across them, is that we try to teach how anxiety wants us to stay away from school, but that is not that we're basically feeding the anxiety when we're doing that. The avoidance of anxiety provoking situations is the problem. And so because the anxiety then will go down, and so the anxiety is winning, and so the anxiety is going to show up again when we're presented with that stimulus. So we center the efforts to help students and parents build distress tolerance skills. So not only do we need to help the student realize or the child realize that they can live through this unpleasant feeling of anxiety, We have to teach the parent that it's okay that their child is living through a high level of anxiety, which is really difficult to do. As a parent, what we want more than anything is our child to be happy, healthy, and peaceful. And so when you see and experience your child going through anxiety, it's not fun. And so we've got to be able to help our child be able to tolerate that anxiety. And so we use distress tolerance skills to be able to do that. And then we also give the caregiver some skills as well, which we're going to get to in a bit. So next, behavior shaping is what we use to establish a behavior that's not currently performed by the person. So we're trying to shape behaviors, reinforcing successive approximations, small steps that lead toward the ultimate desired behavior. And so interventions will include shaping the student as well as the family's behavior, as I just mentioned. So we're going to get into in a bit what family accommodation looks like and how to replace family accommodation with more effective behaviors. Take a sip. So this slide is really hard to conquer. So it's really important to try to understand that the kids who are impacted by this high level of anxiety that's creating school avoidance do not want to feel this. So it is not a choice that they woke up one day and thought, I'm going to refuse to go to school just to get at my parent. And so we're not talking about that. We're talking about distress that the child is experiencing. And so it's really important to support our caregivers in not using a punishment for this because kids are not being willful when it comes to this high level of anxiety. And as you see the loop spinning and spinning and spinning and increasing anxiety, you can start to understand that this child is not doing this to get attention. They're doing this to stop the unpleasant feeling of anxiety. So some of it today, I'm not going to be able to get to this, but some of the interventions for school avoidance actually include the whole team. And so the next slide shows you that this is usually the best case scenario is that we all work together, that the child is getting some interventions, that the family and caregiver is getting some interventions, and that the school is also giving some interventions. So what works best is if we're all three on the same page. Today, I only have an hour with you, and so I'm really going to focus on family caregiver-based interventions and helping you to understand what you can do as parents to help your child with school avoidance. We also have a good bit of work we can do, of course, with the child where they're learning skills, and of course, with the school where they're also a part of the intervention to help the child. So a couple of other things, what we use at Hillside to see what's happening, what's at work, is in DBT, we use the behavior chain analysis. Some of you may be exposed to what that looks like. And then there's also a tool that's been created that is specific to school refusal, and that's called the SRAS. So if you are dealing with this and you're trying to get more help for your child, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and ask the clinician working with the child, which may be their therapist, or getting them a psychological evaluation. You can ask for a school refusal assessment scale, which will really try to get at why this is happening. And so that tool can be used in helping develop interventions to help your child. So I wanted to mention that because in all the literature, the SRAS is mentioned consistently. So getting into what I want to talk to you guys about today and try to help give you some tidbits of what you can do as a parent yourself is really important to understand what family accommodation is. Family accommodation is often talked about in different models with anxiety, depression, PTSD, or eating disorders. And so what it is that the caretaker is doing whatever they can to help their family member with their issue by helping them to avoid or reduce their distress related to symptoms of their disorder. So folks that are doing family accommodation never intended to hurt their child, their loved one, their family member. This happens also with adults and couples where the wife is accommodating the husband's mental illness. It's sort of like enabling and substance abuse. So if you're familiar with that term of enabling, family accommodation is similar to that. So parental accommodation occurs when parents change their own behavior to relieve that child's distress or anxiety. So if you think about our role of being parents, it's our whole job is to protect our child. And so we're hardwired to actually do this over and over because all we're trying to do is make our child have more peace, more relaxed days. And so we don't want to, again, we don't want to experience our child having distress. And so this turns into family accommodation. The child's anxiety is something to be feared, is the message that we end up sending. And so we also end up sending the message that that we don't trust our kiddo to actually manage their anxiety. And so it's really hard for some parents who may have anxiety themselves or may have depression or their own issues themselves to sit by and watch their child experience high levels of distress and high levels of anxiety. And so it's not, I did not realize myself that I was doing it. And so I thought I was being helpful. When in actuality, what it does at some point is increases the anxiety because, again, the anxiety wins. So by removing the source of the anxiety and depriving the child of the opportunity to manage their own feelings, the child's anxiety is reinforced. And so it gives anxiety power that it doesn't deserve and wouldn't otherwise have. It unintentionally sends the signal that parents don't believe in their child's ability to cope, that the child needs to be protected, and that the child may be vulnerable or weak. And so I know that none of us intend for that message to actually occur, but when we do family accommodation, that is what the message is being sent. And then the loop just keeps going. So to get into it a little bit more, parents, one of the things that we do is an overabundance of blanket reassurance. And we're not doing this alone. We're doing this at the same time that the child is also experiencing or asking for help. So your child's asking for help, and you, as the parent, reassure the child and say it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Now, when it becomes maladaptive is when we're doing it so much that the anxiety just stays and the child is not learning actually how to tolerate that high level of distress. And so another scenario is the child allowing the child to create situations in which the entire family is avoiding a problem. So the child's anxiety is not triggered. And so, for example, the caregiver stays home from work and helps the child to overly study for a test because their anxiety is so high that the only way to get that anxiety down is to help that child study. And so then the parent's missing work, which leads to all kinds of problems. And so, again, your intention as the parent was not to make the anxiety grow, but you can see how that is at work. Another scenario is excessive assistance with decisions and simple tasks that the child can develop the ability to do for themselves. So the caregiver may allow the child to check into school to miss a quiz in first period to avoid the discomfort. So this is one that I did. I did this one over and over and over. And I thought, okay, well, they're still going to school for the day. And so it's okay. But what I was doing was actually increasing that anxiety instead of decreasing the anxiety because I was allowing that accommodation to actually occur. Here's another model, and I find the models kind of helpful. I'm very visual myself, so it's helpful for me to see the circle that the distress is related to the disorder. So the distress the child is feeling is related to their high level of anxiety, and so because we're talking about clinical levels of anxiety, then the family accommodation happens where the parent does something to accommodate that anxiety, and then there's a short-term reduction in distress. And so their anxiety and their SUDs go down a little bit. And then there's a continued dependence. So every time the scenario presents itself, they're going to ask that parent, can I check into school and take my quiz the next day so that I can study more? So that continued dependence on the parent for regulation is maintaining those symptoms of anxiety. And so then the distress happens again. And so before you know it, your kid is missing a full week of school. And it's a pattern of behavior that's happening. And so the whole idea is that the therapist working with the family hopefully can get the parent to commit to actually changing their own behavior. And so it's common for us here at Hillside to have a child come into residential and the parent to think that we're going to be able to fix the child and send them back to the community healed. But the parent also has to do work. And so, because families are a system, so kids don't grow up by themselves, they grow up within a family system. And so, I'm not suggesting to you that this is easy. I'm suggesting to you that it takes as much work as the child is having. And so, we really are trying to ensure that we show you how family accommodation works because nobody's intending to make their kid more ill or more sick. So here's another pattern. So it's human nature for our parent to accommodate. Again, this is natural. So parents are supposed to protect their kids against things. But again, the anxiety is not something we need to protect the child from. We need to teach them how to tolerate that anxiety. Parents think they're being helpful in the beginning, and then it just keeps growing. So it's difficult, again, it's difficult to watch your child struggle with symptoms. So it's a lot easier to do one of these family accommodations to actually get the anxiety to go away. At some point, as a parent, you just want it to stop. Parent or caregiver feels mean or guilty if they don't accommodate. So the parent has to learn how to manage their own emotions around this to be able to help their child with school avoidance. So the parent or caregiver may fear that the child will become aggressive or hurt self if they don't accommodate. So this is, we see this a lot, and this is one that we talk about extinction burst when we're in treatment with families, because sometimes when we do stop accommodating, and we'll mention that in the future, we do see an extinction burst where the behaviors will actually increase. The parent or caregiver worries that their child may feel unsupported, which is why the family accommodation continues. So, again, I think it's important for you as parents to start to think about, if you're not already thinking about, what situations most often trigger anxiety in my child, and how do you, as the parent caregiver, respond in those moments? Do you stay calm? Are you able to help them? To encourage them, or are you just giving in to that anxiety? Have any of these responses become expected? And is there anything I'm doing that I maybe shouldn't have to do? So, in some of the literature, it pointed out that there are different parenting styles that we see sometimes when there is school avoidance. So the pusher is the person that believes that everything's behavioral and encourages their child, over encourages their child to just face your fear. If you just face it, then it's not going to keep bothering you. And I wish it were that easy. The softie is somebody that actually gives in. Just stay home today. It's okay. Your anxiety will be fine. Tomorrow we'll try again. That's the softie. And then there's the anticipator, tries to prevent anxiety provoking situations. So they actually go through life and don't even let their child go into a situation or a scenario that might cause anxiety. And then there's the ideal, which is someone who pushes compassionately and supporting competency in their child. And that's what we're all striving to try to do and try to get to. So, some things to remember, 95 to 100% of parent accommodation occurs in a family where anxiety is prevalent. So, this isn't just happening to you, this is happening to all of us. And so, when we have a kiddo who is having some anxiety, this parent accommodation is natural and normal for it to happen. The kiddo may feel less worried in the moment, but higher levels of accommodation are definitely linked to higher levels of anxiety and greater impairment in families and greater burden in parents. So Accommodation also means that there will be poor treatment outcomes if we don't actually start to impact accommodation. When parents stop accommodating, the behavior is still prevalent. So I get this one asked by my clinicians that we supervise here at Hillside. I get this one a lot. So, what if I get the parent to stop accommodating? Do I provide discipline when this situation warrants this? And my answer to this one is yes. So I do think there's a fine balance, and hopefully you are working with a family therapist that you can talk to about this, where you actually do have to switch. I said earlier, don't punish your child for the anxiety, but once the loop and we've got some distress tolerance skills in the child and we've got some skills to help the parent to not use family accommodation, then sometimes we do have to resort to something like removal of a cell phone, removal of a computer to actually discipline. Okay, so that's that. How to stop. So we're going to get into what you can do as a parent to actually change family accommodation. So the goal is to reduce it at the same time that the child is learning distress tolerance skills. So here at Hillside, that's the mode, that treatment that we're using. Some places use CBT. There's some places that do ERP. So it doesn't matter. The kiddos are definitely hopefully in treatment to be able to learn some effective skills to use to be able to tolerate their distress. And then as accommodation decrease, it's important to remember that symptoms can get worse. And so why does that happen? Of course, it's because of an extinction burst that's actually occurring. So and so we have to continue on the path of changing the model, changing the path. So, one of the things to actually help us stop a family accommodation is to actually try to track it. So, it's important to ask yourself the questions as to when this is happening. So, you may want to try to get a goal sheet or try to get some kind of calendar method to be able to track when accommodation is happening. You have to have awareness if you're trying to change a behavior of your own. You have to have awareness that the behavior is actually occurring and how often it's occurring and when is it occurring to be able to target that behavior and learn some new ways. So the suggestion here is to come up with your own way of tracking your accommodation. Um, and then next, what skills do we do to beat this? What do we do to replace this? So the first thing we go to is validation. And so if you have been through one of Gon does a whole thing on behaviorism and actually gets into validation and teaching parents how to validate. It is perfectly okay to actually validate that the child is experiencing anxiety, is experiencing uncomfortable sensations in their body. Anxiety can cause the child to feel tightness in their chest, stomach discomfort, pain in their head, a headache. So all of those things that are happening when we're having high levels of anxiety are normal. So it's important as a parent to find the kernel of truth and what's happening with the child. So acknowledging that they may have thoughts of being scared of going to school is okay. That's not accommodation. And so it's not agreeing that you are going into a scary place. It's agreeing that your response to school is anxiety and is uncomfortable. And so the first line of defense, instead of a statement of accommodation, is to give a statement of validation. And so we're going to talk some more about that. Because that, if it does not come natural to you, if you did not grow up in an environment that was validating, sometimes we have to work at it. So in DBT, we do have different levels of validation. So there's the first level of validation is being present and paying attention, just listening to what the child is going through. And it ranges all the way up to you showing some equality. So maybe you share with the child that you had a high level of distress or anxiety when you had to do something that caused you anxiety, like public speaking, or going to the doctor and having a medical test. And so it's okay and validating to share with your child that you also experience anxiety and still are able to do the task that's presented that creates the anxiety. So that's the highest level of validation. And then there's everything in between. So level 2, 3, 4, 5. These are all and takes practice and something that can be practiced within your family therapy sessions. So There's this sheet also is one of the handouts from our DBT. I believe that those of you who are in the caregiver DBT group on Tuesdays will go through this when you're doing interpersonal effectiveness. And so this is actually breaking down when you're paying attention, looking interested. When you're reflecting back, you're simply saying to the person what you've heard them just say to you. I hear that what you're saying to me is that you're scared to go to school today. And so you can reflect that back to the child. Reading their mind is being sensitive to what is not being said by the other person. So it's actually observing their facial expressions, their body language, what's happening within them. And then there's understanding, looking for how what the other person's feeling, thinking, or doing makes sense based on the person's past experience. And then there's acknowledging the valid. So you want to look for the person's feelings, thinking, or actions or valid response because they fit the current facts. And then there's the equality, where you're actually using a scenario that you have of yourself when you're actually working with your kiddo. So this sheet is another sheet that's in our interpersonal effectiveness module and actually just goes into a few things to remember about validation, what it means, why you want to validate, and things to not validate. So it's important to validate the valid is what the sheet talks about. So, and then we go into some actual practice scenarios. So here's the differences that we have with accommodation. So here's a few things. We're going to break these down. So if the child's asking a lot of questions about and over seeking reassurance, which is very normal for a person that's experiencing high levels of anxiety, the family accommodation is for the family to just say over and over that everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. So when we do that, we're actually feeding that anxiety and feeding that need for reassurance. The validating thing to say is, I see that you're anxious right now. So you just go ahead and call out the emotion that's driving that quest for reassurance. The next one is the child says they're sick. They wake up, they say they're sick, and they're not feeling well and they want to miss school. And you know that they're not sick. So the accommodating thing to do is to allow that child to stay home from school instead of just give in to that. It's because a lot of kiddos will have psychosomatic feelings when they're actually anxious. And so you give in to them and say, you're right, you're sick. Let's just not go to school. We'll try again tomorrow, which is going to increase that desire to have the desire to not go to school. It's going to increase that, but it's also going to increase the anxiety. One of the validating things to say, or acceptance, confidence, is what coping skills can you use? You're not feeling well today, so what can you use? You still have to go to school today, so what can you use to get through the day? Then the third one is child tells parent they're depressed and they've been cutting, and the only things that helps is to play video games. So the family accommodating thing to do is to give in and just let them play video games and avoid their responsibilities. And then the validating thing to do is parent tells child, I want to support you. And by supporting you, I can no longer support your disorder. And so, which is a very powerful statement. You're separating the fact that they're having a high level of anxiety and that that's what they're experiencing from them as a person, which is really effective. So the fourth one and last one is child tries to get out of going to a family event by expressing their intense emotions. They're tearing, they're screaming, they're crying. So again, the accommodating thing is to allow them not to go and to burn those family bridges. The effective thing to do is the parent tells the child, I want to talk to you, but let's talk more when you calm down. And so you allow them to actually stay in their distress, and eventually their suds, nobody stays in their tantrum forever. And so eventually they are going to decrease their emotions. Okay, so next, see, these are some other strategies to keep in mind when we're thinking about family accommodation. Acknowledge that you understand their concerns related to school, but you insist on their immediate return. And so this one is really, really, really important. This takes like a broken record. You have to keep saying it to the child. One of the things to explain to the kiddos is that school is required by law. And so sometimes kids don't know that a parent can go to jail if their child is truant. And so hopefully you guys know to use mental health strategies and to get your school involved with the avoidance so that it doesn't turn into truant. But again, I do think it's effective sometimes to let kids know that the school attendance is something they have to do. It's something that the law requires. Third, discuss avoidance with staff at the school. So this is engaging your school, which is one of the effective interventions with school avoidance, is to get the school to be at this table with you and helping to manage your child's avoidance. And then commit to being firm on school mornings, which is when most symptoms occur. So what skills can parents use to manage their own distress? So we're going to get into that next a little bit to remind you of some skills that you can use. A gradual return to school may need to be considered. This is once the child has stopped going. So as you're starting to expose them to school again, you can get dressed for school, drive them by the school, attend half day. And so all of this takes the partnership of the school to be able to do this, but it's highly effective when you're able to do the gradual. And so I know you just want it to be over and then back in school, although sometimes it takes a gradual response. Okay, so getting into what else we can do as parents and caregivers to be able to tolerate our own distress. So, watching your child go through this high level of anxiety is uncomfortable. And so, we have to develop our own skills that work. The stop skill is a DBT skill and means that you stop for the moment, take a step back, and observe the fact that you are experiencing a high level of anxiety yourself as a parent. And you may have other emotions as well. You may be experiencing anger. Again, a lot of parents feel like it's their fault that their child is not going to school. And so they get frustrated or angry, or they feel like their goal is being blocked of going to work. So you automatically go to anger, fear, distress yourself. And so if you can sit with that emotion, observe the emotion, and understand that you're just experiencing an emotion, sometimes that will help us to proceed mindfully. Another set of skills is the self-soothe skills. That's using your five senses to be able to tolerate your own distress. So one of the most effective, very quick things to do is smell. So our olfactory senses are highly effective in regulating our emotions and sending a message to our brain that we're in a state of peace. So that's why the lavender is here. If you like the smell of lavender, a lot of people use lavender. I use lavender. I also use frankincense and myrrh. I find very, very soothing. So you have to come with your own skills. You have to come with your own things that work for you and figure it out. Then there's also half smile and willing hands. So half smile and willing hands is exactly what it sounds like. So half smile is gently turning up your lips. So your child is telling you they don't want to go to school, and you can gently half smile to be able to tolerate that you're going down this path again. This is exhausting, you guys. I know that it's really, really challenging and really difficult. Half smile will send a message to your brain that you're actually in a state of happiness, not in a state of distress. And there is some science behind this as to why that works. Another is the willing hand. So I find if you clutch your hands like this, it makes you feel like you can't deal with a situation. But if you can relax your hands and actually have willing hands, it helps you to work through the situation with your child a little more effectively. Again, you have to come up with your own skills and your own ways to tolerate the distress. Okay, so next we are going into exposure-based intervention. Sometimes exposure is highly effective and used at the same time other treatment modalities are being used so that the child is exposed to their anxiety and learns to tolerate their anxiety. So in situations of social anxiety, answering questions about absences or having a conversation, these are things that would be used in the child. So these aren't caregivers skills. These are more skills or techniques for the child. The other exposure is asking a teacher for help, giving a speech to a group. Somatic and symptoms of panic. So if your child experiences panic, there are exposure techniques to help them to experience panic and be able to tolerate panic. So exposure works in that it's teaching the child that they can tolerate the level of distress that they're having. So perfectionism and separation anxiety are also listed here. Okay, next we have, do I have? Okay, so these are other treatment interventions. So I do, oh, is it going to play? Okay. So I do want to mention to you that Supportive Parents for Anxious Childhood Emotions space is an actual parent intervention. It is fully parent intervention. The child does not get any skills. It is solely based on the parent changing their own accommodation. And it's written about in a book. I'm going to show you the title of the book in just a moment. Increasing supportive parental responses to childhood anxiety. It works highly well with situations of anxiety, so decreasing accommodations for child anxiety. And then on the right side are more of the exposures. So there's exposure interventions, exposure with DBT or CBT, and then there's exposure response prevention, ERP, which works really well with school avoidance. This is just a little clip about exposure and how effective exposure is. And it basically is going to tell you there needs to be more research, but we do find the exposure methods are very effective in school avoidance. So let's listen. I think you're muted, Gone, so it's not, I can't hear it.
Oh, sorry. Let's try that again.
Cool. Facing your fears is not easy, but it may be the most important thing to do when your fears get in the way of life. Confronting your fears in a planned manner while preventing avoidance is what therapists call exposure therapy. We set out to answer the questions: when does exposure therapy work or not work? With funding from the Wellcome Trust, we scoped the research conducted on exposure therapy in young people aged 14 to 24, reviewing 3,508 papers. We involved 7 young people with lived experience of anxiety, 5 carers, and 8 clinicians from around the world at each stage of the project.
Most research found exposure-based treatments to be effective in treating anxiety conditions, which included specific phobias, social anxiety, OCD, and PTSD. The most common ways to do exposure were either using real-life confrontations or through imagination, while gradually increasing the difficulty.
Preliminary findings suggest that exposure works best when it happens in multiple contexts, it's made more challenging, exposure-based homework is assigned and completed, and exposure is conducted closer to sleep.
There is even emerging evidence for the use of virtual reality or computer-based programs in conducting exposures, but it's still early days.
From the research and discussion with our stakeholder groups, we found that exposure doesn't work when what's learnt isn't practiced outside of therapy. Other mental health problems complicate the treatment, or the therapist and client have a poor relationship. Exposure therapy was not always offered by the therapist, even when most of the research supports its effectiveness.
More research is still required, focusing on comparing pure exposure with exposure-based packages to determine whether add-ons like breathing exercises and cognitive strategies optimizes the exposure, and examining the effectiveness of exposure therapy in treating generalized and separation anxiety.
The evidence for exposure is promising, but we need a systematic program of research to understand how exposure works across this critical age and all the anxiety disorders.
So, okay, thank you. So
Facing your fear.
So that's a little bit about how exposures do work in relation to anxiety. These 2 books are the 2 books that I've used to research, that I've read. Breaking Free of Child Anxiety and OCD is not just about school avoidance. It is also generally for younger children. Although I do find that some of this is super effective with middle schoolers and on up. It talks heavily about family accommodation and how accommodation works and how to change family accommodation into more effective behaviors in relation to your child. And then Overcoming School Avoidance is more of a comprehensive book, actually looking into all the different issues. There's some stuff about persons with autism and their school avoidance, which I did not cover today. So it has a lot of good information about school avoidance and the different diagnoses that we see in relation to school avoidance. It's new, so Overcoming School Avoidance has just come out in 2025, this last year. So there's also some resources in the slides. You'll see, I believe there's an article. Yeah, that first thing from NPR is just an article for parents to read. And then Breaking Free is the blue book, Freeing Your Child from Anxiety and You and Your Anxious Child are also helpful. And then the last book was the black and white book. Then there's also references that we use to create the slides, which is the last slide. So that's the content that I have for you guys. I did see in the chat that there is a question about what about the flat out no, that all this is really good and helpful, but some kids just still upright refuse. And so I would say that there's something more at work and that it may need more look from your therapist. I would also say that's when you consult Hillside and actually look at one of our treatment programs. We do find that our intensive in-home therapy program is very effective with kids with school avoidance. We also have our virtual IOP program, which is after school, so the child can still go to school. And then there's our PHP program, and we've dealt with lots of kids who actually are avoidant and coming up with plans, a very comprehensive plan, not just looking at family accommodation, but looking at a constellation of issues that are happening to be able to help you, the family, develop some interventions. Flat out no may need some discipline. I think I talked heavily earlier about not creating a situation where you're punishing the child for their mental health issue. But if there's a flat out no, it's not just about their anxiety. So there's willfulness, there's defiance, and there's other interventions that you can use to combat some of that. But I can't just tell you use this without knowing everything. Gon, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of make a distinct difference between just school avoidance and life avoidance, right? Like some of the kids who are having like more acute symptoms, more severe symptoms of anxiety or depression, there might be something else going on where they're not just avoiding school, they're avoiding school as part of avoiding life, right? And when we're getting to the point of avoiding life, it's not just like, I'm not going to school. It's the, well, I used to love to play soccer. I'm not going to go to practice. I'm not going to go to youth group. I'm not going to go to music. Like they're starting to shut down on many, many fronts. They're avoiding life. Like they're not coming down for dinner. They just want to stay in their room. And so I think the biggest thing is sometimes distinguishing between, is this school avoidance specifically, or is this life avoidance? Because when we're getting to life avoidance stage, we are needing to look at higher levels of care, right? Like once a week therapy might not be enough now. We might need something a little bit more intensive to really get them back on track. And there's more issues going on that might need to be addressed before we can even address the school avoidance piece. So that's part of it too, is once they're not functioning in daily life on multiple fronts, we're likely looking at life avoidance, not just school avoidance at this point. Any other questions?
Yeah, what other questions do y'all have?
Feel free to use the chat. If you want to unmute, I think you can like raise your hand and I can unmute you. But we have about 10 more minutes for Q&A. And one of the other things as people were thinking about it too, is that when Amy talked about extinction bursts, that things will get worse. They get worse before they get better. So there's going to be a period where when we're starting to do something different, they're going to keep trying that same behavior a little bit harder because it worked in the past until they realize that it's not actually going to work again. All right. There's a quick question in the chat. Amy, do you want to take, and then I'll
Yeah.
unmute Catherine?
Unfortunately, I'm not sure about, so I don't want to answer wrong about the Overcoming School Avoidance being the best resource. It's the most comprehensive resource for everything. I don't know that it's the best one for ASD. ASD is so relatively new as an area of us actually being able to develop different interventions. So I would talk to an expert in the area of autism and see what they recommend.
Catherine, I allowed you to talk, so if you just unmute, you should be able to.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like my daughter has gotten in such a hole that she feels shame to even ask the teachers, tutors, or to even ask for help and or to show that she doesn't know. I mean, I feel like she's become an expert on hiding and talking her way through things. And, she's failing, and all her friends are above her. And I think it's just shame. She will not, she's been given such an opportunity to succeed, and she just doesn't.
That's a tough one. Shame is also very complicated. I hope she is in getting help, getting mental health assistance.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
she's there at
Yeah.
Hillside Residential.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of the kids here at Hillside, shame is highly at work. And there needs to be some specific interventions around that. So make sure that is being shared with the child's individual therapist to ensure that they can target that. So I see lots of good questions here. I see, is school-related anxiety and school avoidance different? Well, not everybody that experiences school-related anxiety is avoidant, meaning that they don't want to go to school. So there are still lots of kids who attend all day long and are experiencing high levels. So that answers that. If a child is really falling apart, OCD, anxiety, still at drop off and crying, would you still drop them off, insist they get out of the car? Yes, I definitely would. And that is coming from my own lived experience. But I wouldn't do it without intervention. And so, what is helpful is trying to get the school to help you develop some kind of way to still get them in the building. But I think this is, again, this loop, I can't overemphasize how important the loop is, because if you start allowing and turning around and going backwards and not going to school, that anxiety is just going to get worse. It doesn't get better, but you definitely want to get some intervention to help. And eventually, my child needed a higher level of care. So your child may need a higher level of care if they're not already in a higher level of care, if you can't get this extinguished, right? And so, do you know how equipped?
I'll add that, that part we talked about, we kind of glossed over it, is the shaping behavior part. Like, we're not going to expect them to jump in and be able to stay all day and from the get-go. It's the gradual part of the getting them back to where you want to be. So we're going to celebrate some of the smaller success as today we at least got out of the car, right? And we might do that for a day or two. And then it's the, hey, we're going to do half day. Hey, we're going to do full days. And so that's kind of the gradual piece of it, where we're still doing a little bit of shaping behaviors instead of just like pushing them into the deep end of the pool, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this is asking about using the SRAS in school districts. I don't have any sense of whether it's used in our Metro Atlanta area. If it is, it's going to be used by one of the counselors, therapists, or school social workers. So those are the people that you would need to ask if they're able to do that evaluation. I would also look at a psych eval and getting the psychologist that's doing the eval to use that instrument. They should be equipped to be able to do it. At what point do you consider that the school isn't the right environment for your child? Do you consider other schools, or is this considered enabling? There's just a real balance, right? And a dialectic to everything. And so I think I don't think it's enabling. I do think sometimes the school fit is not right. And you may want to try all the interventions that we've talked about today, ensuring they're with somebody that can do exposure-based work with them. So exposures are gradual. Also, I could not get into it deeply within an hour. But you start out by kind of doing exposures in the office, leading to exposures in person. And so that you want to make sure you're trying all these interventions and that you're looking at family accommodation. Are there times when we should accommodate anxiousness, or when is it appropriate to accommodate as parents? Yeah, that's a hard one. I don't think I can easily answer that one. And I think if you do accommodate anxiousness, I think you have to decide what's more important in that moment, because sometimes it is important to just keep going, and accommodate, although there's always the consequence of it growing. And so that's just going to happen. Love the question about the school. Go ahead,
I'll
Dawn.
add to that. Like, ideally, what we would want to happen, right, is we want to really substitute accommodation with validation. Like, instead of saying that it will be okay, we want to say you're not feeling okay, and I see you, and I'll sit in this feeling with you, instead of just trying to make you feel better, so that we can co-regulate and learn that we can tolerate this. So if possible, we want parents to be able to use validation instead of accommodation, in order to not feed the anxiety. And like, we're human. There are times that we are gonna, inadvertently accommodate and whatnot. I did
So a
not see the
couple of
question.
things. Someone asked a question about life avoidance that we missed. So I didn't see that.
I didn't see it either.
I don't know if you can come off mute, Catherine, to ask. We can scroll back up. Hall County, I'm sorry you had a bad experience with Hall County. Perhaps going up the chain, there are supervisors of the social work department. Sometimes is a place I would refer you to within a public school system. There's also an agency called Georgia Appleseed. And it sounds like that school system was not giving any credence to it being a mental health problem, which is the law. And so that's when I would get like Appleseed involved. They are an advocacy group for parents. So I'll put their name in here. Thank you. Yes, it is tough. I have walked that walk. And are there resources listed in the deck that provide more information on exposure therapy? Not specifically. It's more about school avoidance and exposure related to that. You can work with your family. If you're a Hillside family, you can ask your family therapist for more resources on exposure-based. And again, thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to put Georgia Appleseed in here.
Yeah. And Miss Catherine, we did not see your question on life avoidance. So if you want to type it in again or ask the question, I'm happy to unmute you. I don't think I see you though. All right, Miss Catherine, I allowed you to talk, so you just have to unmute, and then you should be able to ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay, I was asking whether or not life, I think it was something about avoiding life, whether or not these interventions in the book would it help with a child that is experiencing life avoidance?
To a certain extent, right? Like, some of these intervention is going to be helpful, and it might not be enough. When you have a kid who is in that stage of really just avoiding life at that point, right? It's going to be a multi-pronged approach. There's going to be, yes, some things that we can do as parents to not make the situation worse by accommodating the illness. And there's going to be things that the child has to also do. And so sometimes that's going to go beyond the scope of what a book can help. But it is a good starting point. And I think, having a clinician who can do an assessment on your child and who's working with your child, help kind of give that guidance of what the next step is probably going to be the next correct step in order to get your child the help that they need in order to actually show up, right, to life and be willing and able to face life with all its beauty and suffering. I think that's the other
I would
part of it.
say, yeah, I would say DBT is somewhere, and I did not talk heavily about DBT in this presentation because I wanted to talk about family accommodation. But I would say DBT is the treatment of choice for someone who's avoiding life. It's because it has comprehensive skills, right? And is really there to help a child or adolescent come up with the life worth living goal, which is ultimately what DBT is all about. I didn't mean to
Okay,
cut you
thank
off,
you.
Dawn.
No, that's it.
Mhm.
Thank you all so much. I know it's 101, so I want to be respectful of your time. Feel free to email me if you want a recording or the slide deck. And it might take a little bit for the recording to be ready because it takes forever for the files to compress. And I would be more than happy to share that with you. I appreciate you coming today. I hope this was helpful. Hillside is offering a few more parent engagement and panels that are completely free. The next one is actually in person here on our campus about parenting in the digital age. You can find that information on our website, I think. If not, I will send that in the email follow-up as well. Thank you all so much. Have a great one.